So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Father Ortiz. And we've heard a lot about you from Ed in the meetings coming up to this. He speaks very highly of you, so please take it, and we'll enjoy your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, share screen. Okay, I'm Father Rafael Ortiz, W4RAO, and I'm the Assistant Section Emergency Coordinator for East Tennessee. As it was explained, I was one of the persons who deployed under the ARRL Red Cross procedures. I had a memorandum of understanding, and so when Hurricane Maria devastated the island of Puerto Rico, the Red Cross asked ARRL for assistance. And I have put when all else failed here, because that's exactly what happened in Puerto Rico. Everything failed. Now, I'm going to try, since you have such a packed meeting as far as things to do, I may be going a little fast through this. If you have any questions, you can ask at the very end, and that way we can get through in the shortest amount of time possible. A little bit about the activation procedures. As you saw on the earlier slide, Hurricane Maria hit the island of Puerto Rico on September the 20th. The hurricane devastated the island. There was absolutely no communications in the island. When the Red Cross asked ARRL for help, it was because they could not communicate between the island and the mainland because all communications resources were out. Additionally, the Red Cross headquarters itself in San Juan, Puerto Rico, was flooded by the hurricane. So they went to an alternate site, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. So how did this all happen? On the 25th, 5 days after the hurricane hit, I received a notification through an email from a friend that the ARRL was looking for volunteers to go on a mission to Puerto Rico to try to help the Red Cross. So I called ARRL and spoke to Mike Corey, and who at the time was the emergency communications officer. And he briefly asked some questions about some of the requirements, whether I met the requirements or not. The requirements were that you needed to have some type of MCOM experience. You had to be knowledgeable in Winlink, and I'll explain a little further on that, why that was very important. The ability to deploy for 21 straight days. You had to be medically fit, and you had to be bilingual. The medically fit requirement was set because they did not want people, for example, you could not deploy if you had a CPAP. Makes sense, no power, you couldn't deploy, things like that. So medically, that became a very important item of information. So much so that after I was accepted the following day on the 26th, I underwent an oral exam with a nurse from the Red Cross, who asked all kinds of questions about my ability to deploy. In addition, received a listing of personal items that the Red Cross wanted you to take with you. They included things like sleeping bags, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the caveat here was that everything that you took for the 21 days had to fit in no more than 50 pounds item that would be checked in. And you could only carry one small carry-on in addition to it. So it was interesting because On the list that they sent things like food capability for 21 days, water capability for 21 days, clothing, everything. Now, we were not to take any radio equipment, but again, everything had to fit in one item, and it had to be, the requirement was that it would not exceed 50 pounds. Thus came in military training. I still have a duffel bag, and boy, you learn how to pack everything in a duffel bag when you're in the military. So I was able to get my items that I needed in a duffel bag, and when it was weighed at the airport, it was at 51 pounds. So that happened. Then the Red Cross sent tickets. Electronic tickets for my departure, plus each person was given 2 credit cards. Each credit card, actually there were more debit cards. Each one was had $1,100 funded into it, and so the morning that I left, which was on the 27th, I drove by the Knoxville Red Cross office and picked up those 2 cards. Now, they were funded at $1,100 each, and the instructions were that we needed to withdraw the funds before departing Atlanta. And the reason is they wanted everybody to take cash because none of the ATMs, no banking facility, et cetera, were available on the island. So everybody that deployed on that deployment with the Red Cross had $2,200 in their pockets. I arrived at the airport about 1:30 and went to the hotel where we were assigned to. We signed in. Again, medical was very strict. So we had an additional in-person medical screening. And then we proceeded to our area where we were to meet with the equipment that had been sent. Now, I think that the ARRL had a misstep in the whole procedure, and I told Mike Curry this when he finally arrived in Puerto Rico, and that was that no ARRL representative was available in Atlanta when we showed up. It would have been nice if somebody, even if it was from one of the local ARES organizations or something, had shown up. Because then we'd have had some kind of point of contact and have had someone that we could relay any problems to. Now, one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to inventory all the equipment and actually put it in the containers that we were going to be taking. So what was available were ICOM 7200s. Excuse me, some of them had internal tuners, some of them had external tuners. So we had to sort that out. Had power supplies. Each person had a 4080 dipole. Each person was to have a laptop, but the laptop was Red Cross property. And we each got 50 feet of coax cable and a small toolkit. The 50 feet of coax cable proved to be an issue because if you were like where we were, or some of the people were in a hospital and they had to put an antenna on top of the hospital, 50 feet was not a very convenient thing to have, but we worked that out. So we began to inventory the equipment, and then we had a couple of issues. One of the things that we needed to do was actually download and set up the Winlink on the laptops. As you recall, I said Winlink was a requirement. Of the 22 people that showed up, only 3 of us had ever had any kind of Winlink experience or had a Winlink account. So that became a major issue. We had to get Winlink kind of crash course Winlink for the people that didn't know even anything about Winlink. Another issue was that the laptops belonged to the Red Cross. The Red Cross would not give administrative privilege so that we could download the program. And so that was one of the things that we had to resolve through ARRL in conjunction with the Red Cross. And it wasn't until late that night that we finally got administrative privileges with a password so that we could set up the Winlink account on 25 laptops. There were some shortages. For example, there was absolutely no extension cords, no power strips. And we knew that if we eventually got any kind of power, generator, et cetera, that we would need extension cords. There were no ropes or cords or anything to string up the antennas with. We had absolutely no administrative supplies, so there were no pens, pencils, pads, et cetera, provided. We had HTs, but they were all with AA power packs and no batteries. So they didn't provide any batteries and absolutely no barrel connectors if we needed to extend any of the coax cables. So we went ahead and set up everything. We inventoried. We worked through until about 11 o'clock at night. We finally got to go to our cots for a couple of hours of sleep. At 5 o'clock in the morning, we were already loading up in the buses to go to airport. And this was the Atlanta airport, and this is a picture of where the entire group of Air Force and ARRL personnel, like I said, there are 22 of us that went to Puerto Rico. The force of 50 that they keep talking about, it was actually 50 people were selected. The plan was to send 20 some odd first, and then after 3 weeks of deployment to send the follow-on group. But the follow-on group didn't make it. They decided it wasn't needed after the first 3 weeks. Here we are again. It was a charter blue jet flight. This was taken by the pilot of the aircraft. He thought it was a privilege. Now, we got into the plane and we were told, okay, one of the things that we had to bring was a passport. And being Puerto Rican, I was wondering why I need a passport to go to Puerto Rico. Well, the pilot explained that because of the damage to the airport, the plane at the very, it may be sent to another country for refueling because if it didn't land in Puerto Rico, it would probably go to the nearest airport, which may be another country. So that was the reason for the passports. Another thing, we were the very first flight, commercial or charter flight that was not military controlled to land on the island. The day prior to our departure, a Red Cross plane with another group of Red Cross volunteers sat on the tarmac all day long, 10 hours, and they never received permission to take off. So they returned to the hotel that night. So when we got on the plane, we had no idea whether we would be going or not. But the plane finally took off, and we arrived in Puerto Rico. Our arrival in Puerto Rico, this is the Puerto Rico International Airport. All the planes that were on the tarmac were all Air Force cargo planes and also commercial cargo planes. No other aircraft carrying passengers had been allowed to land in. When you got to the terminal, this was emergency power lighting the terminal area. The carousels, although we're all standing around the carousels, there were no electricity, so the carousel was not working. So we had to actually go and pick up our luggage and pick it up. And the radio equipment was 52 pounds, and the personal gear was 51 pounds, and everybody had to pick up each one and carry it with them from then on. Here we are at the airport. We're awaiting transportation, and we found out that the buses that had been contracted by the Air Force were not available at the time. So the Air Force had to make provisions to rent vehicles. So they rented 25 cars and vans and a rental box truck for our equipment and our luggage. This was our initial shelter. Our initial shelter was a Baptist church in Rio Piedras, which is a town, which is now a suburb of San Juan. And again, another issue occurred in that the Red Cross did not tell the person that was handling logistics in Puerto Rico that the ARRL personnel were coming. So therefore, there were no cots. They only had enough cots for the actual Red Cross volunteers. So we slept, if you can follow this right here, are the pews to the church, which have been all put together. So that's where we slept the first night, in the group of inside those cots. Now, remember I said that the Red Cross headquarters had been flooded. So luckily, the Red Cross was able to get a space in the headquarters for Telemundo. Telemundo is the largest Spanish-speaking television and publications network in the world. And this is their headquarters building right there in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The great thing about this building was that it was totally self-contained. It had two huge generator buildings that powered the entire buildings. So therefore, it had air conditioning. It had its own wells on the ground, so it had its own water. So we had hot and cold running water. We had air conditioning during the daytime hours. It had its own cafeteria. It was a very nice headquarters building. Additionally, it had its own internet satellite system. So therefore, the Red Cross was able to use the internet to perform its mission, and that was getting information back and forth from the island to the mainland, especially people who were trying to contact relatives or people on the island trying to tell people in the mainland that they were in the United States, that tell them that they were okay. And that was supposed to be our mission. Our mission was initially supposed to be to every day sit there and type Excel spreadsheets with all this information about who had been contacted, et cetera, and transmitted via Winlink to be received at the national headquarters in the United States. Well, when they found that they had internet capability, our mission was no longer there for us to support. So what occurred was there was a request from Puerto Rico FEMA to have communications capability, because none of the hospitals, there was absolutely no communications. There was no fire communications, police communications. Hospitals could not talk to each other. The governor could not talk to the mayors of the towns, et cetera. So there was absolutely no infrastructure communication whatsoever. So we took it upon ourselves to try to assist that. One of the things, there are ham radio operators on the island, but most of them had their own issues because they were impacted by the storm themselves. And number two is most of them only had tech licenses. Very few had an HF capability because living in a small island that's 33 by 100, all you need is an HT with a lot of repeaters, and you have communication. Very few people try to communicate any further than just the mainland. So it was basically VHF, UHF communications on the island. The hurricane knocked down the the repeaters. So that was out. So there were no repeaters, no nothing. The FCC suspended licensing for 6 months, so you did not have to have a license to get on a ham radio on the island during that time. And they sent 100 HTs to be used by the police and fire departments. Of course, that was another thing we did. We went ahead and programmed the HTs with the frequencies, et cetera, that they wanted. So we did that. Now, this is a picture, excuse me, of the map of Puerto Rico. Like I said, Puerto Rico is 33 miles by 100 miles. And it has two islands, one right up here and one right about here, that belong to Puerto Rico. Those are the islands of Vieques and Culebra. Hurricane Maria, the reason it did so much damage is that it came in the eastern portion of the island, southeast portion of the island, and it traversed right across the island, and it came out on the northwest part of the island. So it took the whole island, and being only 100 miles, only being 33 miles wide, it devastated the island. The only place that had minor damage was the southwest portion of the island. And the center of the island was the most heavily impacted. Even though Hurricane Maria came in at a Category 4 when it hit the island, since it's a small island again, by the time it hit the central portion, all of central Puerto Rico is a mountain range. So we know that speed increases as we go up in altitude. So in the center of the island, they were looking at more of a Cat 5 devastation. So that was the island. Now, this is something, once we got in, we were able to set up. They gave us a small room. It was more about the size of a closet. It had one 8-foot table, and the 8-foot table ran from one side of the wall to the other. So, the length of it was 8 feet. And we only had enough room behind us to pull the chair backs to get in and out. But it was something that fitted, that it was usable. Luckily, the section manager for Puerto Rico, who a great individual at the time, he is no longer the section manager, but he had gone before we had arrived and brought in his own personal coax and had taken the coax from the roof of the building through the elevator shafts down to where we were. And so, but when we got there, all we had to do was connect the radios and the antenna, and the coax was already set out for us. So again, this is a little bit of the setup. Now, one of the issues was that we had several frequencies to monitor in a very small confined place. And we were trying to operate as net control out of here and have several means of communications going on at the same time. When you have that in a confined space without headsets, it makes it very difficult to operate. Luckily, Heil came through and they sent us Pro 7s on the next plane that came in. So we were able to at least have some kind of communications using the Pro 7s. Now, here's some of the equipment. We had the ICOM 7200, we had an ICOM 7300, and we had 2 HTs to monitor each person. The reason for the HTs were because we had a TACnet that we set up, and also we were able to finally hit one of the repeaters of one of the local persons had brought down his antenna just before the storm. He worked at the power station, the headquarters of the power station, and that's where that repeater was set up. And after the storm, he started working on it, and he was able to get it going. Of course, it didn't have very far range because, again, Puerto Rico is mountainous, and without linking repeaters, you really can't talk very far. It's almost like being in East Tennessee, okay, and trying to operate from one side of the mountain to the other. We also had a mobile radio that was sent to us a couple of days later, set up, because when our mission changed, what we did was not only established to send our people out to different hospitals and fire stations throughout the island to try to get communications, but the Red Cross also had requested that we provide communications for their convoys. Every day, they would send out a convoy from the warehouse in San Juan out to the island and then go to one central location, and from there spider out into 3 different areas. So every day we would have 4 vehicles with radios that would go with them, and they would then be able to have communications within that convoy. And so we would monitor that convoy as far as we could. Again, once they went over any hill or any mountain, we were basically lost. This is the island. If you see these, I don't know if you can see them, but we put little arrows wherever we deployed a radio, amateur radio operator. Now, of course, we were short on operators because out of the 22 people that went, we had one person that was taken to be public information officer. So that person was not with us. They went to the FEMA site, EMC site. We also had 2 people that were shares and Mars operators. So they were taken again for FEMA and set up at the headquarters building in FEMA for Puerto Rico. So that left us approximately 17 people to work with. And once you take 17 people, and then you take 4 of those for the Red Cross operations, that leaves you, luckily 13 people, if at all, if everybody is feeling well. We needed to man net control. So 2 of us decided to man net control. Remember I said Spanish, ability to speak Spanish was one of the requirements. Out of the 22 people, only 2 people had any knowledge of the Spanish language. So that became a problem in that at net control, we were dealing with local ham radio operators. We were dealing with doctors, medical personnel, etc., who had limited knowledge of the language. So I was detailed as one of the net control office persons, and so another person was also detailed as net control. And we operated basically from 7 a.m. to 11 at night, except if there was a need to have the radios going 24 hours a day. We had one person that was not a ham radio operator that volunteered through the Red Cross in Puerto Rico. And what he would do is he would come in at night and stay there with the radios. The two of us that were net control, we slept on the floor on a room next to it. If there was an emergency, he would wake us up and we would take care of it. So the ham radio operators themselves were housed primarily in fire stations. There was a few exceptions that they went actually to the hospitals, but we decided on the fire stations because most of the fire stations in Puerto Rico are almost co-located with the hospital, or at least within walking distance. And we knew that the fire stations had their own emergency power. They had sleeping accommodations, et cetera. We didn't want to overwhelm the hospitals because the hospitals were so overwhelmed that they had litters in the hallways where people were being housed in the hallways. This is a little look at some of the devastation on the island. This is Orocovis, which is up in the mountain center of the island. This used to be a very wide two-lane highway. And as you can see, when the hurricane came through, the traffic was relegated to very slow one-way traffic, with being controlled by the police in various areas where traffic would be stopped to allow the traffic to come in the opposite direction. You can see the electrical power lines. Electrical power lines were all over the island, all over the roads. Since they shut down the power, they decided to just shut all power down rather than have another emergency occur if someone touched the power line or something. So the power was completely shut for the entire island. This is another picture a little further on. We had one radio operator in Orocovis. He was the only other Spanish-speaking person. The problem there is that he basically had a general license, but he had never used it. He really didn't use radios that much. The only reason he came, he's finally told us he was a professor at a university in Puerto Rico, and he was doing a PhD dissertation, and he wanted to come here and get some do some further research on impact of devastations on the local populations. Excuse me. One of the reasons there were no fatalities associated with the storm itself in Puerto Rico is that most of the houses in Puerto Rico, by law, must be built out of concrete. Now, that's to get a building permit. You have to ensure that it's built in concrete. Now, this is a picture of a house and area where no damage occurred. Also, this is an important picture because the mountains here were completely denuded of any vegetation. And this is about 2 weeks after we were there. I went to this area. This is an area, Barrio Guadiana, which is where my family comes from. And so this is a picture taken in one direction, and then I took another picture 180 degrees from it. And as you can see, these houses are devastated. And the reason is because these houses are sitting in other people's properties. It's very common in Puerto Rico where the kids will just build a structure, a house, on their parents' property. And the parents were the ones that had the original concrete home. And so the children would just go on the same property and either build on adjacent to the house, or the house up here is concrete. There used to be another structure all made out of wood on top of it, and it is gone. This is one of the most picturesque places in Puerto Rico. It's in the southern portion of the island. It's it's in Guayama, and as you can see, again, this is an area where the storm came in. The structure made out of concrete, the steps, everything made out of concrete. Everything that was concrete is standing. But you can see the devastation of the trees and telephone lines, etc. This was basically the people. As you can see, we manned the net while we were there. The person in the center was the section manager for Puerto Rico at the time. On the left-hand side of your screen was the only other person other than myself that had any MCOM knowledge. And the only person, well, like I said, there are very few of us that had Winlink capability. Because the way the island is organized, not organized, but the geographical structure of the island made it that without INVIS capability, or INVIS, we were not able to communicate. There was no VHF, and no repeater. So the only way that we found that we could communicate effectively was, and very important, there was only one operator per place that we deployed. The only way that we really operated effectively was via Winlink. The people in the northern portion of the island were able to hit servers in mainland United States. Some of the people in the eastern portion of the island hit servers in Europe. People in the southern part of the island hit servers in South America. But we were able to still download the messages, etc., that were being communicated. And if it had not been for Winlink, we would have had very little effectiveness on the island. So even though we ran an actual voice net several times a day, it was basically a check-in. And most of the time it was maybe we could hit one or two of the stations, but we did have the capability to communicate via Winlink. It was also really good because at one point, before we got everything set up, we had gotten a request from a hospital for medical supplies. The request was 50 items long, and it was being sent via voice. And being that it was medical terminology, et cetera, quantities, et cetera, it was very difficult to copy down. Luckily, we recorded it, and it was in Spanish. Most of the conversation was in Spanish. We recorded the conversation, and between the section manager and myself, we were able to decode it, get it into an English format, put it on a Winlink message, and send it to FEMA for the request. So that was how we operated. And like I said, thanks to Winlink. And Winlink people were fantastic. They even set up an emergency team that worked with us every single day. If we had any issues, they responded to the issue. So they were very, very effective. Now, the other members here, this gentleman here, we had sent to one of the islands, and he was on one of the adjacent islands that belongs to Puerto Rico for 14 days. He had absolutely no communications out there other than with us. And he came back after 14 days because they the two small islands were the first ones to have electricity brought to them. The Corps of Engineers set up emergency generator systems for the two islands. So we brought him back and he assisted us at net control. And then the person here in the yellow shirt actually did not go with us. He was a Red Cross volunteer who had gone with the Red Cross in their logistical department. After getting there and after distributing all the equipment, he had very little functions to do, but he was a tech. He had a tech license, so he came over and offered his assistance. And it was great that he came because he too spoke Spanish. And so we sent him to the main hospital in San Juan, who started then being the point of contact for all evacuations. And later on, when the Navy found out that we had a setup at that hospital for their hospital ship, they sent a team there to set up with him, and it made the communications between the Navy and the hospital really, really effective. And so they were airlifting the people from his site to the Navy ship. This was the final place where the personnel, when they were getting ready to redeploy back to the United States, were housed. It was a FEMA shelter. This is where FEMA personnel actually slept all the time also. Now, some of us, those of us in net control that were sleeping on the floor, after 2 weeks, Red Cross was able to procure a contract with the University of Puerto Rico to use their dorms. So the four of us that were operating net control were able then to have a little better accommodations than the floor. So this was a picture of where my room. And some of the challenges, now that that's over. Some of the challenge was the communications mission was not what we expected when we left. The lack of bilingual operators made it very, very difficult. The lack of MCOM trained personnel. It was amazing that ARRL accepted people that had not been trained. That they could have at least said, do you have ICS 100, 200, 700, and 800? I think rather than just say, do you have any MCOM experience? Because we went down there and people didn't know what a 213 was. Okay, and that is. I mean, they had no idea. They didn't know what a 205 was. They had no idea of how to operate under MCOM. We had equipment shortfalls, but I'm going to tell you, the ham radio operators on the island came through really, really well. They made up the shortfalls. Remember I said we had no barrel connectors, et cetera? One of the operators drove 7 hours to bring us 5 barrel connectors. Okay, he knew that a call went out and he made it upon himself. I'm going to go help. And he brought 5 barrel connectors. We were able to resolve some of these challenges. We switched the mission. At least we got 1 bilingual operator from the Red Cross. We did hands-on daily training, which really we shouldn't have been had to do, but we did hands-on daily training to teach people about, 213s, things like that. So it was a challenge, not just because there was no no power, no communications, etc. But challenges came up every day based on different things that occurred, and but we found resolutions for each one of the challenges. Lessons learned: you have very heavy equipment, and to me, I came out of that saying, if I ever deploy, I'm going to try to deploy QRP, because unless you can't carry what you're carrying, it is useless. You know, we had people on the second, third floor of a hospital trying to carry a 50-pound case. When we went to the headquarters building of Telemundo, luckily they had elevators, because we had to bring all the ham radio equipment to the third floor of that headquarters building when we first arrived, and there were only 3 of us to do it. So, you know, we have a tendency to want to take our shack with us when we deploy. We need to think light when we deploy, if we can, and also have the capability of INVIS for HFUs, so that we can communicate over relatively short distances when there's no VHF capability. Another thing that you need that it's a lesson learned is that we have a tendency to speak quickly and fast. And if someone is on the other line trying to write down a message, write down what you're saying, one of the things that you need to do is only speak as fast as you can personally write, okay? Because the other person is there trying, first of all, to make out what you're saying and then trying to write it. Especially if you go to a foreign country, or if you're speaking to a foreign national in the United States. They may know the English language, but because of accent differences, things can become complicated. The use of the phonetic alphabet. You know, we need to use the phonetic alphabet, get in practice of using it, rather than saying, you know, radio for R, which I hear all the time. You know, we need to use the phonetic language alphabet. Winlink knowledge, I feel, is a must, and I'm glad that WCARES has such a great Winlink program, because I believe it is a must in deployment. And we must practice for deployments. And again, WCARES is really, I think, in the forefront for all of this. Now, that's the end of really my presentation. Now, I'm going to show you how people can make easy mistakes. This was what the ARRL sent down as their official Puerto Rican Caribbean recovery badge or whatever. And I don't know how much money they spent on it, but if you notice, they have the hurricane spinning the wrong direction. They have a clockwise direction on the spin of the hurricane instead of a counterclockwise. So we immediately started laughing when we saw this down there, where they made a big deal about the presentation, and they messed up on the logo. But that's my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.